welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie, and today we have another video. This time we are reviewing round 19 of the 2023 F1 season, where we were at the Interlagos Circuit for the 2023 São Paulo Grand Prix. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel, Hit the Apex, the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. This weekend was a sprint and the final sprint weekend of the season. So the sessions were practice 1, qualifying, the sprint shootout, the sprint, and the race. And of course, we will start on Friday in practice 1, where Sainz led Leclerc and Russell as the sprint weekend got underway in Sao Paulo. Carlos Sainz topped the timesheets in the first and only practice session for this weekend's São Paulo Grand Prix, with a Ferrari driver leading teammate Charles Leclerc and Mercedes' George Russell. Due to the final sprint event of the season taking place on Saturday, today's FP1 offered the teams and drivers their last chance to finalise their setups and carry out any final preparations before qualifying later today. As such, it was a busy hour at the Interlagos Circuit. The session got underway in warm and dry conditions, and Max Verstappen was amongst those ready to get going, with a world champion leading the queue of drivers in the pit lane, waiting for the green light to show. Everybody barring the Williams duo and Daniel Ricciardo was out on track as soon as the session began, with the weather forecast suggesting a 20% chance of rain falling during the hour. Some may have been keen to get some running in just in case of changing conditions, though it remained dry throughout. All cars were running the hard tyre in their opening laps. There seemed to be trouble for Esteban Ocon, who reported a sideways screw on his front tyre. Meanwhile, Verstappen, who was quick to set the early pace, explained that his seat was flexing, though was reassured by race engineer Gianpiero Lambiase that it wasn't a reliability concern. Sainz was the first to have a slight wobble after 10 minutes of running, with the Ferrari losing the rear after taking too much curb. The Scuderia weren't quite matching the pace of Red Bull and Mercedes, as Verstappen and Sergio Perez led the way in the early stages from Lewis Hamilton and Russell. But the Italian team put an extensive amount of laps in during the session as they looked to address their tyre wear issues. Fernando Alonso, who will be keen to bounce back this weekend following 2 consecutive DNFs, was forced to pit after being informed that his car had picked up a puncture, resulting in him having to put on a new set of hard tyres. Soon afterwards, Yuki Tsunoda put himself at the top of the timesheets after being the first to strap on the medium tyres, before being toppled by Russell on the same compound. As the hour reached the halfway point, Russell remained in P1 as a range of strategies played out across the pack. There was drama between Nico Hülkenberg and Lando Norris, with a pair making contact as Norris attempted to pass the slow-moving Haas. The incident was noted by the stewards and was to be investigated after the session. That didn't stop Hülkenberg and teammate Kevin Magnussen from putting themselves high up on the timesheets during their runs on the soft tyre, while many others remained on the hard and mediums. With the wind picking up as the hour reached its final 10 minutes, the likes of Sainz and Leclerc opted to practice some qualifying runs on the soft tyre. This helped the Ferrari duo to slot into P1 and 2 respectively, pushing Russell down to 3rd. Hülkenberg held on to 4th in a mixed order from Alex Albon in 5th and Lance Stroll in 6th. Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guan Yu, and Logan Sargent, who experienced an issue in the second half of the session that seemed to cause the front tyre to lift off the ground through some corners, and Magnussen rounded out the top 10. Alonso ended the hour in 11th, with Hamilton 12th and the AlphaTauri pair of Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo 13th and 14th. Ocon followed in 15th ahead of Verstappen down in 16th. Both he and Perez, who was in 18th, only used the hard tyres during this session. Valtteri Bottas was 17th, while the McLaren pair of Norris and Oscar Piastri completed the order in P19 and P20. As many teams didn't run the soft tyre in this sole practice session, this poses many questions ahead of qualifying, which the teams and drivers will now get ready for, which kicked off at 3 p.m. local time. And we will move to qualifying then, where Max Verstappen seals the pole, ahead of Leclerc and Stroll as the rain brings an early end to Sao Paulo qualifying. Max Verstappen had sealed pole position for the São Paulo Grand Prix, with the Red Bull driver coming out on top in a qualifying session that was red flagged in this final stages due to rain. The world champion had set provisional pole in the first runs of Q3, having put in a lap of 1 minute 10.727 seconds. But with the weather rapidly changing as the clock ticked down, the session was brought to an early end, meaning that there wasn't the opportunity for drivers to improve on their only flying lap. Charles Leclerc would join Verstappen on the front row, while Aston Martin benefited from getting their drivers out on track early, with Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso in P3 and 4 respectively. The Mercedes duo of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell followed in 5th and 6th, and Lando Norris, who looked impressively fast in Q2, had to settle for 7th. Carlos Sainz ended the session in P8, while Sergio Perez and Oscar Piastri rounded out the top 10. Nico Hülkenberg was the lead Haas in 11th, with the Alpine pair of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly following behind in 12th and 13th. Kevin Magnussen ended the session in 14th, and despite his Williams showing good pace in Q1, Alex Albon couldn't reach the final segment of qualifying and would start from 15th. It was a shocking Q1 when Daniel Ricciardo failed to get out of the elimination zone, marking a dramatic contrast from his P4 qualifying result at the Mexico City Grand Prix. The Australian would start in P17, with his AlphaTauri teammate Yuki Tsunoda a place ahead in P16. It was also a difficult session for Alfa Romeo. Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu ended up in P18 and P20 respectively, with Logan Sargent in between them in P19. So as it happened then in Q1, Russell went top as Ricciardo made a shock exit. Sao Paulo was hosting the 6th and final sprint event of the season, meaning that the drivers had just one practice session to lock in their setups for the weekend earlier on Friday, and with many opting not to run the soft tyres in that hour, there were many unknowns heading into qualifying. There was an initial 15-minute delay to proceedings getting underway at Interlagos due to debris on the track, when the session eventually kicked off in cloudy but dry conditions, with a 60% chance of rain predicted. Many drivers queued up at the end of the pit lane awaiting the green light, perhaps keen to get a banker lap in should the rain arrive. Most of the field opted to run new soft tyres, while Piastri strapped on a used set that he ran briefly in FP1. The McLaren driver put the first time lap on the board with a 1 minute 11.494 second lap before teammate Norris caught the eye by topping the timesheets with a time 3/10 quicker than Verstappen's. Hamilton then slotted in between them in second. There was trouble at the pit exit for Russell and Gasly, with the Mercedes driving slowly while Gasly appeared alongside and half overtook him, sparking a complaint from Gasly on the team radio. The stewards confirmed that the alleged impeding incident would be investigated after the session. As the skies grew increasingly grey, Leclerc set the pace with 8 minutes to go. Soon afterwards, Piastri went up to P2 after putting some fresh tyres on, with his lap just 0.047 seconds behind Leclerc's. The track continued to evolve as the laps came in, with some drivers seemingly at risk, having kept their used tyres for their second runs, including the Mercedes duo, with Hamilton's engineer Pete Bonington explaining that they weren't confident of getting through in P8. The team decided to strap some fresh rubber on for the final runs. Meanwhile, Albon made quite a jump out of the elimination zone by slotting into P4. There was reports of drops of rain from Stroll as the clock ticked down. Russell soon went fastest, while Hülkenberg surged up to an impressive third, but others weren't so lucky, with Ricciardo failing to get into Q2 after that memorable qualifying performance last time out in Mexico. AlphaTauri teammate Tsunoda also exited in P16, which was his first elimination in Q1 since Hungary, with Bottas, Sargent and Zhou ending the session in 18th, 19th and 20th respectively. So knocked out in Q1 was Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Bottas, Sargent and Zhou. Moving to Q2 then, Norris stars to set the pace from Verstappen and Perez. There was a sense of deja vu for Q2, with drivers lined up at the pit lane exit ahead of the green light showing, with further talk of raindrops falling. The Red Bull drivers headed out first on fresh soft tyres, while Albon was also keen to hit the track. While Perez initially looked to be quicker than Verstappen in the first sector, he lost time in the middle and ended the lap 2 tenths away from his teammate, with Verstappen setting the pace on a 1 minute 10.162 second lap. Despite being on used tyres, Norris pumped in a lap good enough for P2, only 0.161 seconds away from Verstappen. Piastri followed him third, just 0.007 seconds back from his fellow McLaren driver. Meanwhile, the Haas duo opted to stay in the garage during the early stages, seemingly confident that rain wouldn't hit. When they did join the action, Hülkenberg and Magnussen slotted into P8 and 9 respectively, pushing the likes of Albon and Alonso into the drop zone. Elsewhere, Hamilton experienced quite a slide at turn 4 as the track temperatures continued to fall, but managed to go 5th. Sainz improved to go up to second behind Verstappen on new soft tyres, with Leclerc ahead of Hamilton in 6th. With the time ticking, Alonso got himself out of the elimination zone by going into P2 before Norris went fastest. Teammate Piastri was told to save his tyres, potentially putting him at risk in 7th. Albon fell victim to track limits and had his lap deleted, dropping him down to P15. Stroll became the man at risk in P10 as the final laps came in, but nobody was able to improve to haul themselves out of the bottom 5. Both the Haas and Alpine cars exited the session, with Hülkenberg in P11 from Ocon, Gasly and Magnussen, respectively. Albon rounded out the drivers in the elimination zone in P15, so knocked out in Q2 was Hülkenberg, Ocon, Gasly, Magnussen and Albon. And finally in Q3, the weather brought the session to an early end as Verstappen took P1. As the drivers again formed an orderly queue to exit the pit lane for Q3, Leclerc was told on the team radio that rain was expected 7 minutes into the session. The skies looked dark as all 10 cars headed out onto the circuit. With everyone opting for a fresh set of tyres, Verstappen set the provisional pole lap in the first runs with a 1 minute 10.727 second lap. Norris went 7th before the yellow flags were waved following an off for Piastri at turn 12, though the Australian was able to return to the track, but it did impact Perez on his push lap. The rain started to fall, meaning that the drivers who had put their laps in early had benefited. With everyone returning to the pits, Verstappen remained on top from Leclerc, Stroll and Alonso. It was then announced that the session had been stopped and wouldn't be resumed, meaning that there was not an opportunity to improve on those initial flying laps. As such, Verstappen claimed pole as he seeks what could be his 17th win of the season, with Leclerc in second while the Aston Martin duo held on to the second row. This will come as a boost for the squad, who have faced a downturn in form in recent races. Hamilton and Russell took P5 and 6, which might dent their hopes of a repeat of Russell's victory in Brazil back in 2022. Norris ended the session in P7, which was a disappointing outcome for the McLaren after a strong display earlier in qualifying, with his former teammate Sainz joining him on the 4th row in 8th. Perez will start from 9th, though the Red Bull drivers amongst those summoned by the stewards for allegedly impeding at the pit exit. It was also a tough result for Piastri, who took 10th. The rookie driver was the last to get out on track, and with his mistake on his flying lap, didn't set a timed lap. Verstappen said after qualifying, "We didn't know when it would hit in qualifying. We thought it would hit, but this is, of course, insane weather. And Charles and I were just discussing our laps. They felt terrible, but I don't know. The wind started to change and started to be very strong, and we lost a lot of lap time because of it. But it was all quite hectic in the last lap. It seems that it's all very close, so you could see that already in qualifying. I expect all the same in the race. Around here, there is always quite a lot of deg with the tyres, so it's all about that management. Last year, of course, we didn't get that right, but I think we're a bit better this year." Before the 2023 São Paulo Grand Prix takes place on Sunday, the drivers would next hit the track for the sprint shootout on Saturday at 11 a.m. local time, ahead of the final sprint of the season. And we will move to the sprint shootout then, where Norris claimed P1 in Sao Paulo's sprint shootout as he triumphs over Verstappen and Perez. Lando Norris clinched P1 for the sprint shootout at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, having put his McLaren 0.061 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen. The Briton set a time of 1 minute 10.622 seconds, making up for the disappointment of his lower than expected result in Friday's qualifying. Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez managed to take third despite using running used tyres. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton put their Mercedes cars in fourth and fifth, while Yuki Tsunoda was an impressive sixth ahead of Charles Leclerc in seventh. There was a good showing for Daniel Ricciardo in P8, while Carlos Sainz claimed P9 and Oscar Piastri finished P10, who was racing at Interlagos for the first time in his F1 career. The Haas pair of Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg will start the sprint from P11 and 12, respectively, after just missing out on making it into SQ3. Behind them was Pierre Gasly, who exited SQ2 in 13th. Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas took P14, while Fernando Alonso also dropped out of SQ2 in P15, with the Aston Martin mechanics unable to repair damage on his car following a collision with Esteban Ocon in SQ1. The incident, which would be investigated by the stewards, brought a dramatic early end to SQ1 when Ocon crashed into the barriers at turn 3 as a result of the contact. The Alpine driver had been in the elimination zone and as such found himself ending the session in P16. After a strong performance on Friday to take P3, Lance Stroll had a tougher session and dropped out in P17. Zhou Guanyu also made an early exit in P18, while the Williams cars of Alex Albon and Logan Sargent brought up the rear of the sprint grid in 19th and 20th. As it happened then in SQ1, Sainz led as Ocon and Alonso in the Ocon and Alonso incident brought out the red flags. After an eventful opening day of running at Interlagos on Friday, in which Verstappen took pole for Sunday's race as inclement weather brought an early end to qualifying, the drivers returned to action on Saturday for the final sprint shootout of 2023. Fortunately for those not a fan of the rain, the 12-minute SQ1 session got underway in warm and dry conditions. However, this posed the risk of the track having lost grip overnight. It was a quiet start when the green light came on, with nobody making a move initially, before several drivers headed out on the mandatory medium tyres. Yesterday's poleman Verstappen was the first to hit the circuit as half the field started to put some laps in, while the remaining 10 stayed in the garage, perhaps wanting to avoid using too many tyres. The world champion set the early pace on a 1 minute 11.888 second lap, 3 tenths ahead of teammate Perez. With 8 minutes to go, all of the drivers had left the pits as the times continued to come in, with Sainz putting himself at the top of the timesheets. While some of the pack opted to pit, the Red Bull duo remained out on the circuit. Elsewhere, Piastri suffered a slight wobble, as he had done in Friday's qualifying, though managed to avoid an off. There was trouble for Magnussen, who had slotted into fifth as the Haas was forced to pit due to something being stuck on the front of his car, potentially putting him at risk of being pushed down the order as the clock ticked down. After McLaren were unlucky in Friday's qualifying, it looked like there could be a chance of history repeating, with Piastri in P14 as the session headed into its final minutes. However, the shootout was then brought to a halt as the yellow flags were initially waved for Ocon, who had crashed out but was fortunately okay, before this then led to the red flags being shown. Meanwhile, Alonso had suffered what looked to be a puncture and was forced to limp back to the pits. Replay showed that there'd been contact between the Alpine, which appeared to get slightly out of shape over the curbs on a flying lap, and the slower moving Aston Martin into turn 3, prompting an angry response from Ocon on team radio. The incident was noted by the stewards, and it was soon confirmed that SQ1 wouldn't be resumed, meaning that the drivers in the elimination zone wouldn't get another chance to better their lap times. Sainz ended the session on top from Norris and Hamilton, and there was further trouble for Ocon as he found himself out of the shootout in P16. While Alonso made it through, his teammate Stroll was less lucky, ending up in P17, also making an early exit with the Alfa Romeo Zhou, along with the Williams duo of Albon, who had been improving when the red flags came out, and Sargent. So knocked out in SQ1 was Ocon, Stroll, Zhou, Albon, and Sargent. In SQ2, Norris set the pace in a delayed session. There was a delay to SQ2 getting going as work was carried out to repair the barriers following Ocon's heavy crash, and this also offered an opportunity for Aston Martin to attempt to fix Alonso's car, with the Spaniard having ended SQ1 in P11. The shootout eventually continued at 11:40 local time, with 10 minutes going on the clock as SQ2 began. As was the case in SQ1, Verstappen decided to be the first out on track and got himself at the front of the pit lane queue as the drivers awaited the green light. He was followed by Perez, with both Red Bulls heading out on fresh medium tyres. Despite the Aston Martin mechanics working on his car, it appeared that Alonso wouldn't be taking part in the session, with the two-time world champion having already been out to speak to the media. Meanwhile, the majority of the remaining drivers were putting their first laps in, and Verstappen again set the pace with a time of 1 minute 11.449 seconds. There was an impressive early display from Haas, with Hulkenberg and Magnussen going 5th and 7th, pushing the Mercedes pair down to P9 and 10. A lull in the action followed before the field, many of who were now running used medium tyres, and returned to the track for the final minutes of SQ2. It all looked tight in the dying moments, but AlphaTauri made a dramatic leap out of the elimination zone, with Ricciardo going into second and Tsunoda reaching 7th. The Japanese driver was pushed down as others went ahead, including Norris, who topped the timesheets, but Tsunoda still managed to hold on to P10. That put Magnussen and Hulkenberg out of the running in P11 and 12 respectively, followed by Gasly in 13th and Bottas in 14th. Alonso didn't return to action, putting him in P15 on the sprint grid. So knocked out in SQ2 was Magnussen, Hulkenberg, Gasly, Bottas and Alonso. And in SQ3 it was P1 for Norris as he outpaced Red Bull. After an eventful session so far, the 8-minute top 10 shootout got underway, but this time there was no great rush to get going, with just a single lap run on the cards. Some drivers, Perez, Sainz and Piastri namely, were left without a fresh set of soft tyres for the session, with all having been used in Friday's qualifying. There was finally movement as the clock ticked down to 4 minutes. Verstappen was again keen to get going and pulled off a couple of overtakes on his way out of the pits, giving him some fresh air on track. Ahead of him, Piastri was the first to get a lap on the board, putting in a 1 minute 11.189 second lap. This didn't keep him in P1 for long, with Norris beating that lap on a 1 minute 10.622 second lap, while Verstappen slotted into second. Tsunoda impressively put himself in third before being pushed down by Perez. Despite other laps coming in, Norris held on to pole for the sprint ahead of Verstappen by 600ths of a second. Perez sealed third, with Russell in fourth and Hamilton fifth. The fast Tsunoda would start from P6 on the sprint grid, with Leclerc behind in seventh and Ricciardo taking P8. Sainz and Piastri rounding out the top 10. It was confirmed after the session that, along with Alonso and Ocon, other drivers had been summoned to see the stewards. Norris and Tsunoda both called for alleged failures to follow the race director's instructions. Norris said after the sprint shootout, "A great day, but honestly, it felt like one of the worst laps I've done, so it's a surprise. My first pole in a long time, so I'm happy. The pace has been good all weekend. The car's been strong. It's a tough one. The bulls are always quick. Max is very quick. I'll give it my all." The drivers would now take a break before lining up for the 100-kilometre sprint at 3:30 p.m. local time. And we will move to that session then, where Verstappen clinched victory from Norris and Perez in a thrilling Sao Paulo sprint. Max Verstappen added to his tally of wins in the sprint race at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, having taken P1 from Lando Norris off the line. The Dutchman launched ahead at the start of the 24-lap encounter and remained mostly unchallenged throughout, despite Norris piling on the pressure at times. With the sprint format offering a free tyre choice, most of the grid opted to begin the race on the soft tyre, as only Logan Sargent at the back and the Haas duo selected the mediums. It was a good start from Norris, but Verstappen soon swept past into the lead in turn one, while George Russell took P3 from Sergio Perez. Lewis Hamilton was quick to join the fight with Perez and came out on top to claim P4. Norris then fell victim to Russell as the latter dived down the inside of the McLaren into turn 10. Further back, the AlphaTauri pair of Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo lost out to the Ferrari duo, while Oscar Piastri had an off-track excursion. 4 laps in and Perez was looking racy, with the Mexican getting past Hamilton at turn 1 before Leclerc approached to try and make a move on the 7-time world champion, though ultimately had to back out. It seemed to be a tough moment for Mercedes as Russell also lost a place further ahead after Norris utilised the DRS to pass into second. Meanwhile, Fernando Alonso, who suffered an early exit in the sprint shootout following a collision with Esteban Ocon, putting him P15 on the grid, was making moves, overtaking Kevin Magnussen for 12th. While the top four of Verstappen, Norris, Russell and Perez seemed to have broken away slightly at the front by lap 7, a DRS train was starting to form further back. The troubles seemed to continue for the Silver Arrows as Perez closed in on Russell. Initially, the Red Bull looked to have got ahead into turn 1 before Russell made a move back into turn 4. However, by lap 10, Perez had got the overtake done, having again surged through at turn 1 before holding it into turn 4 this time. Elsewhere, Ricciardo went wheel to wheel with Carlos Sainz in a fight for P8 and stayed ahead until turn 4, where Sainz reclaimed the position. At the front, Norris was continuing to close the gap to Verstappen, bringing it down to 1.3 seconds by lap 13. Plenty of battles were playing out across the field, with the Aston Martin pair working their way forwards. Lance Stroll picked off Ocon for P13, while the chasing Alonso tried to find a way past Pierre Gasly in the scrap for P11. Things were starting to go wrong for Ricciardo, who lost a place to fellow Australian Piastri as Alonso relentlessly duelled with Gasly behind them. Alonso eventually came out on top following a very close battle. As the race headed into lap 17, Verstappen and Norris looked to be in a race of their own, though the gap between them remained at just under 2 seconds. Meanwhile, the Haas drivers seemed to be having a nightmare afternoon, having slipped back to 16th and 17th after starting from 11th and 12th on the grid. The Alpine cars also seemed to be struggling as Stroll capitalised on Gasly's apparent tyre struggles to snatch P12. Just up the road, Piastri in P9 had Ricciardo, Alonso and then Stroll close on his tail. With just 4 laps remaining, Ricciardo attempted a pass into turn 1 on Piastri, but the McLarens continued to hold position. Up ahead, Charles Leclerc closed in on Hamilton before making a move through into P5 into turn 1 before Tsunoda tried to follow suit. The Mercedes stayed ahead after the pair engaged in a drag race down the straight. 1 lap later, Tsunoda used the DRS to overtake Hamilton for P6, while Ricciardo made it past Piastri for P9. The determined Alonso was soon chasing Piastri for P10, while 3 drivers, Nico Hulkenberg, Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas, were scrapping for P17. Alonso seems to have got the better of Piastri in the dying moments of the race in turn one, but Piastri took the place back. It was smoother sailing up ahead for Verstappen now, who crossed the line to take his fourth sprint win of the season, with Norris in second and Perez in third. Russell followed in fourth, while Leclerc ended the event in P5, just 6 tenths clear of Tsunoda in P6. Hamilton held on to seventh, while Sainz claimed the final point in P8. Ricciardo and Piastri rounded out the top 10 with the Aston Martin pair of Alonso and Stroll in 11th and 12th. Two Alpines in the form of Gasly and Ocon followed in 13th and 14th, while Alex Albon claimed P15. Kevin Magnussen took P16 in the 100-kilometre dash, while Zhou, Nico Hulkenberg, Bottas and Sargent completed the order from 17th to 20th respectively. Verstappen said after the sprint, it was important to get ahead at the start. Then it was all about management. 24 laps on one tyre set is very long. We managed the race quite well out there today. Last year was very difficult for us around here. Today was much better. I think we learned a lot and hopefully we can do something similar tomorrow. The Aston Martin cars were on the charge during the sprint, with Alonso working his way forwards from P15 on the grid to P11, while Stroll finished in P12 after starting in P17. Things went in the wrong direction for Haas though. Magnussen and Hulkenberg had lined up in 11th and 12th respectively, but ended the event in 16th and 18th. With the final sprint event of 2023 complete, attention now turns to the São Paulo Grand Prix on Sunday. And we will move to the race then, where Verstappen sealed a record 17th win of the season from Norris and Alonso in the São Paulo Grand Prix. Max Verstappen put in an assured drive to take a dominant victory in the São Paulo Grand Prix, making it a record-breaking 17th win for the world champion in 2023. There was drama even before the race had got underway when Charles Leclerc went off on the formation lap after losing the hydraulics, forcing him to retire. When the lights went out, Verstappen made a clean start into the lead, but a heavy collision between Alex Albon and Kevin Magnussen behind resulted in the red flags being thrown. It was another strong getaway from Verstappen at the restart, who resisted a challenge from Norris to hold P1 before going on to clinch his second win of the weekend after coming out on top in Saturday's sprint. Norris claimed a solid second place, while Alonso completed the podium after holding off Sergio Perez in a thrilling battle to the line. Lance Stroll added to Aston Martin's tally by taking fifth, ahead of the sole Ferrari runner of Carlos Sainz in sixth. Pierre Gasly was the lead Alpine in seventh, while Lewis Hamilton ended a tough day for Mercedes in P8. Yuki Tsunoda and Esteban Ocon rounded out the top 10. Logan Sargent just missed out on points in P11 and Nico Hulkenberg ended up in 12th, with both drivers running solo for their respective teams. Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri were the last of those to cross the line in P13 and 14. The Australian pair had each suffered damage in the first corner incident, but were able to have their cars repaired during the red flag period. There were several retirements from the race, with George Russell forced to pit owing to an oil temperature issue after a challenging afternoon, while the Alfa Romeo duo of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu both recorded a DNF due to technical problems. Magnussen and Albon were out following their first lap crash, while Leclerc also recorded a DNF due to his formation lap exit. So as it happened then, after a thrilling F1 sprint in which Verstappen added to his tally of wins, all eyes were now on Sunday's action at Interlagos. Could the world champion repeat his success, or might his rivals have benefited from knowledge gained during Saturday's running? There had been some changes made to the original starting order since Friday's qualifying. Russell, Ocon and Gasly had all been penalised 2 grid places for driving unnecessarily slowly and failing to follow the race director's instructions. Everyone barring Sargent opted to start the event on the soft tyres, with a Williams driver instead using the mediums. Verstappen lined up in pole on a used set, while Leclerc and Stroll in second and third had gone for fresh rubber. Before the lights had even gone out, there was a shot when Leclerc went off at turn 7 on the formation lap. The Monegasque reported that he lost the hydraulics, prompting him to question why he was so unlucky on the team radio. He pulled down an escape road, putting him out of the race. When things did get underway, Verstappen made a solid getaway to hold the lead, while Norris impressively shot up into P2 from P6. Hamilton also had a strong launch to move into third, getting a leap on the Aston Martin duo. There was a big collision behind, though, between Magnussen and Albon, leading to the safety car being deployed as both had crashed heavily. Replay showed that Hulkenberg was squeezed and subsequently made contact with Albon, which ricocheted the Williams into the path of Magnussen. Piastri was also caught up in the incident, having suffered a broken rear wing after being clipped from behind by the Dane. This looked to have put the McLaren out of the running, while Ricciardo had also pulled into the pits after sustaining damage to his rear wing, seemingly due to a flying tyre carcass. With the red flags being shown due to the extensive debris out on track, everybody headed into the pit lane. This seemed to offer hope for Piastri, with the Australians' engineer informing him that they would try to repair the car in time to take the restart. The pause to proceedings paid off for both Piastri and Ricciardo, who, having had their cars fixed, were able to take the restart from the pit lane. Meanwhile, the rest of the field made their way to the grid for the standing start, with Verstappen again acting his launch into P1, while Norris managed to stay ahead of Hamilton. Hamilton then faced a challenge from a charging Alonso, who used the slipstream to take P3 from the Mercedes into turn 4. Further back, Alonso's teammate Stroll had fallen backwards to 7th, while Hulkenberg climbed up to P12. As DRS was enabled on lap 6 of 71, Norris had managed to stay within a second of Verstappen at the front of the pack. The Briton closed the gap enough to have a look at a possible move into turn 1, but was unable to find a way and fell back from the Red Bull into the next lap. Had Norris taken too much life out of his tyres? While the top three had pulled away by lap 10, Russell was voicing some frustration at being held up by Hamilton in the fight for P4, with Perez piling the pressure on Russell for 5th. Ricciardo and Piastri, meanwhile, found themselves a lap down at the back, while Hulkenberg dropped down to P14 after being overtaken by both Alfa Romeos. Perez got ahead of Russell into turn 1, and while the latter tried to fight back down the straight into turn 4, Perez ultimately was able to hold on. Losing a position prompted Russell to question his team's tactics on the radio, asking, "Are we working together here, or are we just doing our own race?" The response was, "We're still discussing." Ocon was the first to pit on lap 15 to swap to the medium tyres, followed by Zhou soon afterwards, who looked to be trying the undercut on Tsunoda. Elsewhere, Perez was now hunting down Hamilton for P4 and soon swept down the inside into turn 1, with Mercedes looking to be struggling for pace. Hamilton headed into the pits for his first stop on lap 19, emerging with medium tyres into clean air in 11th. His teammate followed suit just a lap later, rejoining the pack behind the 7-time world champion. There seemed to be some concern from Hamilton, who radioed in about a steering issue with his front right tyre. With Perez pitting soon afterwards, the undercut had paid off for Hamilton, as he was ahead when the Mexican returned to the track. There was a sense of deja vu, with Perez again having to chase down the Silver Arrows machine. This time he tried to overtake around the outside of turn 1. It didn't work, but a move on the straight proved successful. There was a 4th retirement from the race on lap 24 when Zhou was forced to pit with a technical issue. Meanwhile, Stroll had pitted and returned to the track behind Russell, but it wasn't long before the Aston Martin made a straightforward pass on the Briton to clinch P9. Alonso became the first of the top 3 runners to make his stop and emerged back out into 6th after bolting on the medium tyre. Piastri, who was still running in last, also visited the pits to swap to the soft compound, having complained about the medium over the radio. As more drivers pitted, Verstappen and Norris had both made their stops before heading back out in their same positions of P1 and P2, respectively. There was a bit of action in the pit lane for some, with Sainz being released from his stop just as Tsunoda was driving up the pit lane. After going side by side, both ultimately yielded. While the leading three cars had held position, Perez was looking to be closing the gap to third place Alonso by lap 31 of 71. Stroll was 4 seconds back from the Red Bull in P5, but the battle for sixth was becoming intriguing, with Russell all over the back of Hamilton. Further back, Bottas looked keen to score a point as the sole Alfa Romeo remained in the race. Gasly overtook him for P9, but the Finn managed to hold on to 10th. Elsewhere, Sainz had dramatically closed in on that Mercedes battle, with the Ferrari within half a second of Russell. "I'm starting to struggle with the tyres," Hamilton reported on lap 35. Just moments later, Sainz picked off Russell for 7th. Will the Silver Arrows need to consider a three-stop strategy? Up ahead, Perez was continuing to eat into the gap to Alonso in the hunt for third. As the Grand Prix passed its halfway point, Tsunoda overtook Bottas for P10 in what could be a crucial move given the constructors' battle between the respective teams, AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo. The Japanese driver wasn't the only one making moves, with Sainz getting the leap on Hamilton into turn 4. At the front, Norris and Verstappen looked to be swapping fastest lap times, but the Dutchman remained 5 seconds clear of the former. Alonso was 12 seconds back in third and seemed to be remaining cool about the potential challenge from Perez, with the driver from Mexico appearing to lose ground. Disaster struck for Alfa Romeo when Bottas had to retire his car on lap 41, meaning that both of the team's drivers were out of the running. There also seemed to be further bother for Russell, who was told to lift and coast and consequently had the Alpine of Gasly closing in on him in a fight for 8th. Gasly sailed past into turn 1 on lap 43, pushing Russell down to 9th and potentially into the clutches of a fast Tsunoda. Cameras showed Mercedes boss Toto Wolff looking not too happy in the garage as the difficulties seemed to be continuing for his cars. Despite moving into P8, Gasly explained that he had an issue with his brakes, while Hamilton reported that his car felt bad in the air. Meanwhile, the second round of pit stops had kicked off, with Russell putting on some used softs while Hamilton soon followed suit. Perez overtook Tsunoda after pitting, and Hamilton made a move on Ocon to go into P8. The Briton seemed unhappy with his soft tyres, though, having told his engineer, "We should have gone for the hards." Alpine opted to switch Gasly and Ocon, putting a flying Gasly into 9th and again on the path of Hamilton. Once again, the Frenchman breezed past into turn 1, leaving Hamilton to question why he still couldn't catch him with DRS. As lap 53 of 71 arrived, Perez had taken a second out of Alonso's advantage in the battle for third. The other Aston Martin of Stroll, meanwhile, had a slightly slow pit stop and emerged into P6 ahead of Sainz. Ocon made another visit to the pits for fresh, soft tyres and quickly set the fastest lap of the race, with his team saying that Russell, who was 14 seconds ahead in P10, was the target. Up ahead, the scrap between Perez and Alonso had dramatically heated up as the race entered into the last 15 laps, with Perez less than a second away from his rival for the final podium position. Verstappen made his second pit stop on lap 58 to put on a set of soft tyres, which handed the lead over to Norris with a gap of 11 seconds. Meanwhile, Perez had DRS but was still unable to find a way past Alonso. Soon afterwards, Russell brought an end to what had been a challenging afternoon when he was forced to retire his W14 from the race, with the team stating that it was due to high and worsening oil temperature. At the front, Norris headed to the pits and strapped on some used softs. The Briton returned to the circuit in P2, while Alonso was continuing to hold off Perez as they fought for third. Could the Red Bull man find a way through with 10 laps remaining? Norris was looking speedy, having set a new fastest lap with 9 seconds back on track from Verstappen. Elsewhere, Sainz looked to have lost ground to Stroll, with the Canadian holding P5 from the sole Ferrari runner in 6th. This left all eyes on the Alonso and Perez duel. Perez seemed to be struggling with his tyres while Alonso benefited from the fresh air ahead of him, being 28 seconds behind Norris. Sainz's position suddenly looked to be less certain, meanwhile after reporting having no downshifts. As the race moved into its final 2 laps, Perez finally dived down Alonso on the inside into turn 1. The Spaniard wasn't giving up without a fight and tried to have a look into turn 4 to no avail, while another attempt on the next lap didn't work. It wasn't over yet though, as Alonso thrillingly returned to third into turn 4. The scrap continued up until the checkered flag, where Alonso clung on by less than a tenth of a second in an incredible finish. Up ahead, though, Verstappen had crossed the line to clinch win 17 of the season, with Norris remaining unchallenged in second. Stroll bolstered Aston Martin's points for the day in fifth, while Sainz managed to hold on to sixth despite his downshift issues. Gasly and Ocon both took points for Alpine in 7th and 10th respectively, with Hamilton and Tsunoda between them in 8th and 9th. Sargent and Hulkenberg followed in P11 and 12, and Ricciardo and Piastri were the last of the field to finish the race following their earlier damage in the opening lap melee. So Verstappen said after the race, the starts were very important today. Both of them were very good. Then after that, the whole race was about the management of the tyres. We were good on any tyre, but I think especially that middle stint, we could create a bit of a gap. So I thought that was very strong there. It all looked quite good, but with the high degradation around here, you were constantly correcting the car, so your focus always needed to be there. But luckily, it worked out great today. And now there are just 2 races remaining on the 2023 F1 calendar, with the first of those being the inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix, which will take place on the weekend of November 17th to the 19th. So that is it for this video then. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel. Hit the Apex the F1 channel and at MCFC Hips on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care.